Welcome back, everybody. Without much further ado, we're going to dive into the fourth and final panel of today: challenges, opportunity, and risks in the cannabis sector. We have an incredible opportunity to not only talk where we started, but where we are now and where we're coming from. This panel is going to do a great job of it. Here to moderate that conversation is Keenan Loomis, President and CEO of the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. Keenan, thanks very much for joining us, and over to you. Enjoy this incredible group of humans.
Thank you, Nathan. Really appreciate it. And thanks for inviting me to be a part of this great day. I've learned a lot already, and I hope you will learn a lot from our speakers here today. My name is Keenan Loomis. I am President and CEO of the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. I've been in this role for almost 9 years now. I am a recovering attorney in my own right. And we as an organization, this is 176 years that this organization has been in existence, Hamilton's oldest institution. And we represent 1,000 businesses that employ 75,000 people in our community. We've created a little bit of a name for ourselves as advocates in the cannabis industry. Locally, provincially, and federally as well. The opening came for me. I'm really interested and fascinated by being witness to the dawn of a new industry. But the opening came for us when the provincial government came into place and decided to reverse the path of the previous provincial government and to allow for the private sector sale of cannabis. And we decided this is a really good opportunity for us locally to advocate to our council to be an opt-in community. And we did that. We put all of our efforts behind that, switched enough votes on council to be an opt-in community. And the payoff came not too long ago. I was in a panel with Corinne Cousineau of the Green Organic Dutchman, and she said that had it not been for that advocacy, TGOD would not have invested in Hamilton. And as a result, we would not have nearly as much, if not any, of the industry that we currently have here in Hamilton. So when it comes to jobs and economic impact and revenue, to me, that was one of the things I was most proud of, to hear that from Corinne of anything that we've accomplished over the course of our tenure. So I'm now going to introduce my guests and fellow panelists here as we bring it home for today. The first speaker I'd like to introduce is Brad Moore. He is CEO and board member of Global Applications Corporation. Brad, please introduce yourself and give the audience a little bit of a flavor for how you came to be in this position.
Sure. Well, thanks very much. And thanks for the opportunity to speak on this panel with all these other great speakers. It's always exciting for Global Cannabis. We just, it was funny. I was saying that we were just down at MJ BizCon, and this is the kind of size that I like. And when I got down there, the marketing did such a good thing. There's where I thought there was going to be 50 people I was talking to, there was 300 in person. So I really appreciate this format. So I am the CEO of Global Cannabis Applications Corp. We like to say we're a blockchain company with a cannabis problem, but actually what we are is we're a cannabis data company. And our whole focus since Q4 2017, when I ventured into this space, it's about better outcomes for medical cannabis patients. And we truly believe that we're dealing with a unique plant, with a unique individual. And there's probably like a better widget out there to figure out how to make it a more reliable product. And I think specifically we tend to focus on the medical space because, the construct is if you're putting something in, telling somebody to put something in their body for medical reasons, you better be sure that it does what you say it's going to do. And I think that's a critical path. And, as an ex-military veteran and seeing things that service members have gone through all the way through over time, and also as a cancer survivor, as early as last year, it's a hard decision to make that choice to use something that you're not sure about versus something that like a long tail opioid, but at least what it's going to do. And so at GCAC, we're focused on one construct using advanced technologies through the blockchain machine learning to actually come up with a solution that will actually allow all that good information that goes back out to the consumer to come back to the cultivator and come up with a better product.
Excellent. Thanks, Brad. Looking forward to learning more from you. Our next guest is Erica Emery. She is Director of Product and Strategic Development at Galaxy Brands. Over to you, Erica.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and join everyone today. I think this is going to be a really great conversation. My name's Erica. I am the director, as Keenan mentioned, of product at Galaxy. And basically, I've been in the industry since 2017. And I've always been on the licensed producer side, so I'm happy to wear that hat. But my focus really is on product development and differentiation and the risks and challenges obviously associated with that. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of join the panelists today and understand a little bit more.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Erica. Our next guest is Mark Segui. He is VP Policy and Government Affairs, Tourism Industry Association of Canada. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. I should tell everybody that even though I've been in the sort of policy and advocacy world for more than 30 years, I'm 8 weeks into my stint here at the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. So tourism is not my background, but clearly big challenges here. Looking forward to participating and addressing those challenges. And I would say I'm even newer to the cannabis tourism sector. Fascinating world as the industry, I think, rebuilds and recovers from obviously devastating impacts of the pandemic. Clearly, we have to make sure that the emerging sector of cannabis tourism, I think, comes along also, because I think I see lots of potential there. So happy to be here. Looking forward to a great discussion.
Welcome, Mark. We'll be gentle with you since you are so new in your role. All right, and last but not least is Rishi Melchin. He's partner M&A advisory, cannabis leader at Deloitte. Over to you, Rishi.
Yeah, thanks, Keenan. Thanks everyone, first of all, for having me here. Like all my other fellow panelists, really excited to be here. My entry into the legal industry was about 3 years ago. I started doing a lot of M&A work. I've been doing M&A transaction work for about a decade. And I noticed a bunch of cannabis companies, a lot of M&A activity, and this is 2018-19. And one thing led to another. And, you know, my book that year was about 90% cannabis companies. And we were fortunate at Deloitte to be working with a whole host of cannabis companies, from small LPs to large ones that were raising capital, et cetera. And I really got into it in a large way, looking at all the different types of services we could provide. So my angle has really been from an advisory perspective. I've been fortunate to watch the industry grow, face tons of headwinds, including COVID, regulatory issues, this and that. In 3 short years, we've really seen an industry, you know, go where most industries it takes, you know, over a decade. And along the way, we've also been fortunate to work with a bunch of multinational companies, CPGs, and global companies as well, looking at the category. So interesting perspective on how others view our Canadian industry as well.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Rishi. Great to have you on board. Okay, so I have a number of questions. I just want to remind the audience that you are able to ask questions through Slido, and we invite you to do so. We have set aside time at the end of our conversation to answer your questions. But my first question to our panelists, and whomever wants to start first, please go ahead. But we've talked a lot about, or we've heard a lot of talk throughout the day about how we've gotten to where we are. But as Nathan says, we haven't really talked about where we're going. And so that's kind of what we're here to do. And I want to know from your perspective, what the future of the industry looks like from both a consumer perspective and a producer perspective. So what does Cannabis 2.0 look like in Canada? And who wants to go first with that question? Brad, Erica, you guys are in the industry for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely start this off and talking about, you know, from a consumer and a product perspective. I think there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us. I think, you know, we're at the early stages of differentiation, exploring different product categories that, you know, we see in other markets like the US. And, you know, that starts with our ability from a federal regulation perspective to offer those similar products and to ultimately have the consumer experience what others are experiencing throughout the world. So I think really from the future of 2.0 products is we're going to see a lot more differentiation and just a lot more availability. But again, there's some roadblocks that we'll need to remove as the total industry, as we all work together to ensure that if the true goal is to move from the illicit industry, which I think we're all aligned to, and that's really the goal of legalization as a whole, we need to be able to offer, similar products to the illicit market at a similar price point with similar access, because that's truly how we're going to achieve that mission.
Okay, Brad?
Yeah, I would parrot everything that Erica's saying. I think there's two things we got to look at here. There's medical and there's recreational adult usage. And so what does that mean for each one? I think one of the biggest things getting back to is the underpinning drivers. Why do people still buy from the black market, right? And truly understanding that. And, Erica said similar products for similar prices, right? And so I think, in the construct of understanding what we're dealing with a plant. And I believe it was, the CEO of Cannabis Finance arm said, there's stricter controls on growing tobacco than there is on cannabis in a lot of cases, right? And so, if everything is a variance and, let alone the medical side, even for adult usage, if a product is all over the map, why would you pay extra for it when the guy down the street, at least And so there's this construct of, we got to get better as an industry. I think it means we also got to get better just understanding the product itself. And when you're dealing with a unique plant and a unique human being from the medical angle, you need to have some level of consistency. You can't talk about dosing for medical purposes if you don't even know what works, right? That's like saying you should take X amount of milligrams of Moderna for COVID, but you don't know Moderna works for COVID because it changes all the time. I mean, for us, we play in Israel, we play in Europe. We're right in the process of hopefully, cross our fingers, getting our non-possession selling license just for the sake of implementing controls around working with cultivators to say, hey, if you're doing all the right things, you should be rewarded with information coming back so you can at least understand what to do on a repeatable basis, especially if you say something's good for shoulder bursitis, but it's good for knee swelling, then focus on selling it for knee swelling. But there's so many rules and restrictions that tie cultivators' hands that actually don't allow, you can't, for example, labeling on certain things is just, they're trying to treat cannabis like it's a formulated medicine, and it's not. It's a plant, and there's variances of the plant. So we need to figure out different ways, not just for regulating it, but actually how to control, manufacture it, and use that data, right? Use that data, because from our perspective, it's all about a big data play.
Yeah. All right, we'll get back to some of those points that you made. Rishi, what does Cannabis 2.0 look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I like Brad's points. I'm going to jump on it from more of a financial perspective. Dosing and onset time are two of the major areas that are being addressed by LPs, because they realize that's an area they have to fix, right? THC and CBD effects can take up to 4 hours and often require, regular use for achievement of a consistent onset time, which new users have no idea about, and nobody's educating them about that either, right? There's delays in onset times that lead to inexperienced users overdosing and having horrible, initial experiences as well. So, improving onset time and ensuring consistent doses is something I think the LPs realize they need to get right. It's something that will help increase their market. So from a consumer perspective, I think consumers will benefit from that. I think also, flavor infusions are also still being addressed. Many of the products, at least the edible products and beverages and infused products, haven't had the most appealing flavors to date. So particularly in beverages. So I know very clearly that is an area that a lot of the beverage producers are looking at. I think, increasing their flavored shot portfolios, mocktails, things like that, I think is something as well. And, given the really restrictive dosing and packaging requirements for 10 milligrams at most of THC, I think you're going to see an interesting interplay between concentrates and edible products where people just start blurring the lines, right, and say, well, it's a lozenge, it's not a edible, and it's got 50 milligrams of THC in it now, and you will see LPs doing that relatively soon, and it will be in compliance with the law. So I think consumers have a lot to look forward to, and Unfortunately, it hasn't happened faster because of some of the regulation, but I think LPs are well on their way to figuring out ways around that.
Okay, thanks for painting that picture for us. And Mark, we heard a little bit about cannabis tourism, but really I don't think we have any sort of activity in the cannabis tourism trade yet. So I assume that the future for you is endless. Talk about what we need to do to be able to really have a cannabis tourism industry here in Canada.
So I think just to set the table for a second, in doing my research leading into this panel, I came across a stat that I actually found kind of interesting. So apparently, and I think this is a North American stat, but it might be just a US stat, so forgive me, but apparently 29% of all active leisure travelers are interested in some kind of cannabis-related activity when they go on vacation. So right there, that tells you that the demand within the tourism world for this experience is quite high. And my understanding is that that's actually growing, and I know it varies depending on generation. If you consider the level of demand, you got to conclude that the cannabis sector, tourism sector in Canada is sort of primed for considerable growth. My understanding is it was growing quite quickly before pandemic as not a cottage industry, but as a bolt-on to the broader cannabis industry. So there was already a bunch of initiatives going on that relate to travelers and exposing them to the experience. And so I can just see going forward as the broader tourism industry rebounds, because obviously tourism writ large now is severely affected by the pandemic. So we have a lot of recovery work to do, and it's going to take a few years to get back to where we were. But as we do that recovery work, and as the sector writ large grows, I can't imagine that the tourism cannabis sector doesn't grow along with it. I think there's big opportunity here. The demand is clearly there. So a lot of very innovative business people, I think, will just capitalize on that interest and that demand and fulfill that demand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've talked about what we think Cannabis 2.0 can be, but what are the current obstacles that present challenges to emerging businesses within the cannabis industry? And I'll go to you first, Rishi, on this, and kind of go backwards through the group.
Sure. I mean, so there are a lot of obstacles. There's obviously the capital markets, which have bounced back significantly, but still aren't really that receptive to new companies unless they've got some kind of US optionality or some kind of bent where they can issue a press release saying they've got some tie to the US for whenever they're going to legalize. So, capital market challenges do remain. It's still a very retail investor driven industry. We haven't, you burn institutional investors like we did several years ago. It's going to take them a while to come back. And you haven't seen the profitability of the bellwethers yet to start enticing those back. So that's a challenge. I think, policy stances such as treating CBD similar to THC has prevented, with no health and wellness channel option, has prevented the spawning of a massive industry, which, we see down south has started, right? You can go into Walgreens or Walmart or any of those and buy health and wellness CBD products. You can't do that in Canada because it's regulated under the Cannabis Act. So hopefully we'll see some relief there. And also, restricting medical distribution, like you still can't get it through pharmacies unless that pharmacy happens to have a license, right? So it's still, those are challenges still. I think we've got restrictive marketing, branding, and retailing rules. I talked a little bit about that before in ways some are going to get around it, but it'd be nice if, we didn't have to get cute with the rules and can just, have a bit of a easier competitive landscape. I think there's a very competitive illicit market still on both price and quality. Great strides have been made. I think we're, depending on what numbers you read, almost half of Canadian sales are now in the legal market, which is massive progress, from 3 years ago when it was zero. But all those factors, I think, are going to continue to create headwinds and challenges for the industry.
Okay. Erica, from your perspective as an LP, what are the things that are holding you back from your future success?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rishi kind of hit on a few main points, but for us, it really comes down to the ability to educate, which is really in the marketing promotion of cannabis. There's still a lot of consumers who aren't aware or don't understand or are still intimidated. And so if we can't speak to how this can affect you or what you can use this for in certain ways, and we have to kind of skirt around it to be compliant with the regulations, then we're not really delivering that message. And we're not really allowing them to come into the industry in an easier way. I think, access, which Rishi talked about, which is just both on the medical side as well on the recreational side. Recreational, you can talk about over access right now based on retail, or medical is just not the same level of access between, having a prescription and these types of things. I think there's, so much that can happen, and there are really a lot of challenges, but it's for all of us to work together to continue to kind of have these conversations, which will move it forward. There's challenges whether you're a producer at the provincial level, at the federal level, retailers, wherever you play in this industry, there are challenges and there are risks. And I think for us, we just want to continue to be open, have those conversations amongst each other to find the best solutions, because at the end of the day, we want this industry to succeed, and we can only do it with all of us being involved.
Okay, Brad, you talk a lot about medical users. What are the impediments to your future plans?
Wow, there's so many. Well, like I said, as a cancer guy from last year, so when you walk into the cancer clinic, and and I was sick from the treatment, which is what most people experience, right? And they just say, we don't know what to tell you, right? And the rubber really hits the road versus a lot of conjecture and posturing and thinking about things. And when your butt's actually in the hot seat, you just don't take chances. You just don't do it. Like it's like I couldn't imagine, all the other times I had to go to emergency, having to go in there because I had a seizure on the floor because I had something with too much THC, or I had something for pain relief that was good, and then it wasn't good the second time I used it. And that's the concern, right? And so, I like so being a data company, and it's interesting, like at the beginning of the year, we did a deal with a data broker out of the UK. And one of the people buying the data was one of the big 5 firms. And then the other one was a major pharmaceutical company. And it started off, what they were interested in was growing. Then it all switched half year. They start talking about efficacy. We need to know what works, because see, the thing is, if you've got efficacy and you know something works, which means that you now have a repeatable product, which means you have a repeatable process. And then the question is, it's still a plant. How do you get repeatability, right? Well, look at it this way. Going to what Rishi said about the 4-hour effect, if you took 233,000 people over 2 years using 300 grams a year, and you looked at all the attestations of growing and consumer feedback, plus something like an Apple Watch for a 4-hour period of heart rate, we've done the math on this, so trust me, I know I'm right on this part about it, you'd have 1 trillion data points. And we know that there's 233,000 people in Canada using 300 grams a year for medical purposes. You know what I mean? If not in Canada, then in Israel and Europe. So that's incredible. So if we can't figure out what's working, and then most importantly, show to the cultivator how to actually get there over and over and over again. But the problem is the regulators won't let people have access to certain information. They won't let the consumer feel safe enough to post information and provide the feedback. And that, once again, when you're looking at a product that's unique and a human being that's unique, we believe you got to measure it on a per gram basis. So how do you do that? So I hate to say it, I see the biggest opportunity for us because of labeling issues in the United States. And so we just signed a big deal in California with a whole bunch of Emerald Triangle growers, because I can actually put a QR code on a package and have the consumers, attest their experience anonymized to that gram that they consumed. And you're not allowed to do that here. So how I want to, what I would have loved to know in Erica back in the day when I was sick, and she said, hey, Brad, here's all the information, but where do The problem is with clinical studies, how do I know what I'm taking is the same that was tested in that clinical study? So it's to me, once again, to harp on it, it's a data play, right? And I've got too many friends that are veterans from when I was in the military in the 90s and the Yugoslavia, all the way up to the guys coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, that they're self-medicating. That's not good, right? We need to provide proper information to people if we say it's good for this. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean a one-sided product sheet. So that's our position.
We heard so many of the players in the recreational market complain that this is all through a health lens, the regulatory framework. But you're saying that even that is not being optimized, or is not the right framework either, or it's not a good framework.
Well,
right now,
if we were dealing with synthetic products, it's a good approach, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I mean, Erica could get into the construct, and so could Rishi, about the construct of the entourage effect, and and the mitigation, and what we know, what works in the body, and how those affect that. And so, like, our perspective is like, look, the manufacturing processing cannabis ends when you consume it. It ends when you consume it, because it's a living organism that changes all the way until it hits your body. There's variances that can happen all the way through that. So good cultivators should get the benefit of those experience of consumers. And right now, the regulations tie your hands. Like, we were trying to work on a deal in Germany. It's a narcotic over there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's under what do you do with that? Right? What do you do with it?
Okay. Thanks, Brad. Mark, so the growing of the tourism industry, I think a lot of people would think that requires consumption lounges, and I don't know of any province in Canada that does have it. Ontario doesn't, and it's something that we're clamoring for. But is that it, or are there other aspects to the growth of the cannabis tourism industry?
Well, listen, I think, just to put it in a broader context, clearly the big challenge for the growth of that particular market is tied strictly to the bigger market of tourism, right? So tourism, as everyone knows, was very hard hit during the pandemic. And so it's got a ways to go to recover. So I think cannabis tourism being a subset of that sector, it's going to take time for it to regrow. But I think there's massive potential. We talked about that before. The moat, it seems like the Canadian cannabis tourism sector, to me, had a moat for a while, which may be getting smaller as more foreign jurisdictions sort of legalize cannabis. So we have an advantage now from what I see, and we should sort of capitalize on it. I think some of the obstacles that I'm seeing, maybe some of them relate to, the consumption lounges is definitely one, just to talk about that one for a second. So, and I'll draw a comparison, obviously, to the wine industry. You go to Niagara-on-the-Lake, you can visit, 35 vineyards. You can go into their facilities. They manufacture there. You could sample the product. You could buy pretty much as much product as you want. And you could take it home. So to kind of, just cut to the chase. So not true with respect to cannabis. And so there are regulations and limitations on that kind of activity that relate to consumption on site, but also related to promotion and marketing of that kind of offering and experience. And so I think that kind of has to change. Another thing I think maybe we need to look at in terms of a challenge to increasingly grow the business as tourism writ large grows is, I think, building stronger partnerships. I think, there are corporations and organizations set up to sort of promote, let's say, Canadian tourism writ large. We have a ton of destination marketing organizations in the country. Building bigger partnerships between cannabis offerings, tourism offerings, and those DMOs, as we call them, the destination marketing organizations, I think would be beneficial. You can't sell a product if people aren't aware of it. So I think those kind of three big, huge buckets need to be looked at, and that will certainly aid growth going forward.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So as Health Canada conducts its Cannabis Act review, or is supposed to conduct its Cannabis Act review, what would be your top priorities for them, for your industry? Erica, I'll start with you first.
Yeah, I'll hit on three main points. Marketing
Please.
promotion, which is what I just spoke about. So hopefully opening some of the doors on that side. We still want to promote safety and all that kind of stuff, but just being able to speak to it and educate it a little bit more would definitely be something, we're interested in seeing. The second, obviously, is the removal of CBD from the Cannabis Act as a whole. So that would, provide a lot more access, allowed for it to sit on the wellness side, and really be treated more like a supplement, which then again opens so much opportunity. And the third will just the milligram cap. I think, we've all talked about the milligram cap on edibles. And I think, I spoke to earlier about similar products. That is the biggest challenge and risk for us right now, specifically in the edible category. And so I would love to see that change and be something similar to what the US is doing.
Okay, it's amazing the prudishness of the US over cannabis and marijuana. I could say this as an American, yet you see CBD everywhere in all Walgreens and everywhere throughout the country, and we can't do that here in Canada. So Brad, what would you say to Health Canada?
Oh,
and clean it up first.
yeah. I gotta turn off my ex-soldier talk, right? Yeah. Look, I think we're missing. I think the problem is we're, and it doesn't matter who's in power around this argument, generally, like a lot of things, I think there's a bureaucracy that's running thing that's tying, essentially tying our shoelaces together, and we're tripping over it. And I find it very interesting, listening to Mark talk, is really what he's talking about is, the lounges in the gray market days, right? That some, coming back to, into those things that maybe that actually might make sense. But, I'll put it this way. We need better information. And just because we're used to getting information in one way, like, through the clinical study thing, if you're going to say it's medical, and you have to go through this gated FDA Health Canada type approval, it just might not fit, because this is, once again, it's a plant, and we have to start thinking about, maybe is it a different classification? I can't for the life of me understand why the CBD is restricted the way it is here. Like, it just really just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that, there's, interestingly enough, there's a lot of opportunities to actually provide people with a better experience, whether recreational or for medicinal purposes. And once again, it's going to take some very innovative, creative thinking at the government regulatory bureaucracy level to let go of some control strings, right? I think that's a big thing, to kind of let it go, let industry take a little bit more of a lead, put some better brains in, some process, hate to say it, some technology, right? In a way that will provide a data set. Once again, there's a lot of way to get to the number 4, and it's not always just simple addition. There's long division. There's just a lot of different ways that we can get at the information we need around this. And so, I'm not overly hopeful around those things, because it, can it be in the bureaucracy that it can be, but I do hope we don't miss out on the opportunity, like I said, for patients like myself and a lot of other people. It's not about the 1% or 1% of people who use cannabis. It's about growing it from 2% or 1%, 3%, 4%. That's what I believe the opportunity is.
Okay. Rishi, as an M&A guy, with this being regulated under Health Canada, that doesn't really give me a whole lot of hope that they're really focused on commercial success. So what would you recommend to them?
I think one piece that the industry has been screaming for is just a relook at the excise taxes. Those have become a really material cost as prices have come down, right? Because those taxes are fixed to kilograms or milliliters of cannabis, and they were originally assumed that prices would be $10, and it's not. It's way lower, and so it ends up being a very high tax on producers. So it hurts new folks getting in the industry. It hurts folks getting the profitability. It also, it doesn't differentiate for the medicinal market, and so it seems ludicrous that we're taxing medicine here, right? So I think some of that. I think to add on to what everyone else has said, I mean, I don't disagree with any of those. I would just add this one onto the list, the looking at the excise tax and how that's being used.
Okay. And Mark, your recommendations to Health Canada will be?
Well, listen, I think it was mentioned a few times, there's obviously the regulations that revolve around promotion. And there's one thing I would point out is my recommendation, I think, to Health Canada and the minister would be to maybe start talking to the tourism minister, because as you may know from last week, a dedicated minister of tourism was announced federally. And so, if we all have the goal of sort of rebuilding the tourism industry and recognizing that the cannabis tourism industry is part of that, I think there are conversations to be had here. And so that's sort of be my recommendation for sure.
And how many other ministries should also have some sort of oversight over this industry as well, right?
Oh my, yeah, exactly. There's like 20 of them, I think now. Oversight.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question on Slido. It's from Anna, and maybe Erica might be the right person to answer this. She asks, what are the laws for small lenders in Canada investing in a startup local cannabis store? We now have over 120 of them in Hamilton. We had over 80 illicit cannabis stores before legalization. So there's definitely some demand here. Is there anything that a small lender would need to be aware of when considering lending? Maybe this just goes to the broader issue of, the financing industry here in Canada just really doesn't want to touch this, does it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rishi's probably a better one to speak on.
Rishi, okay.
But I would say, from my perspective, it's just retail's a tough one right now, just based on, municipality restrictions, and then just the amount of licenses from a retail perspective. But in terms of lending, I'm going to pass it over to Rishi, because that's kind of out of my area.
Okay. Go ahead, Rishi.
Yeah, I mean, I from what I understand, I mean, it's still a very tough environment to get, a bank to give you a loan for a license at the retail level, unless you've got some kind of corporate backing. So if you're in some kind of franchise deal with one of the big LPs, but it's not only is it tough to get lending, to get financing, but it's a cutthroat competitive game right now, depending on where you locate your retail stores. So, I almost think that the financing is one of the latter headaches. Like, I mean, figuring out how to get your model right so that, you can actually make decent margins is very tough, especially in certain provinces where, you're buying from the government at the same prices that the government's selling to you and me and delivering it to our house for $8. So it's a very tough retail environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question from Slido, and this is a little bit related. I think this is related to why it's so difficult to get financing and banking. And we've heard about it in the other panels. There's a great deal of stigma surrounding cannabis still, despite legalization and despite public sentiment. How can the sector overcome that to continue to innovate? And I'll go with you, Brad, first.
Yeah. So trying to think about this because we're a publicly traded company. I'm trying to think about, I mean, when you're a micro capping cannabis, it's kind of like being a guppy without a set of fins. The tide goes in, the tide goes out, and you get washed around and it's relative to that tide is driven in the past has been driven by these ridiculous evaluations. You remember back in the days, if you had if you had a license and if you had a license, you were worth a whole bunch of money. So I don't know. Like I think, in the context of money, I think one of the things that just has to happen is there needs to be a better construct around what the product, and I keep going back to what the product can actually do, which means, I don't get into put it this way, I never get into the argument about terpenes and, coming up with a better widget in terms of a new product, new this. At the end of the day, I can say, come up with whatever you want. Just make sure that when you create that, you do it consistently. You understand what's coming out of the ground. It's the same thing over and over and over. And it's better to have 3 things coming out of the ground that are the same thing over and over versus 30 things coming out differently every time, right? And I think part of that will remove the stigma. I think that there needs to be, and there's going to be a construct of time. I mean, one of the things is that I recognized is, once again, as that patient, it's hard to have this conversation with your doctor who doesn't know anything. What does he know? He's got to do his own Google search work. There's very limited resource for him to actually make an informed decision. And you know what? This is not a different experience than I had talking with doctors in Israel, which has a very advanced, older medical cannabis program than when we did in Canada, or talking with people in Europe, or even talking with doctors in California. Once again, you have to kind of dig into it. So I don't think that, and since we all, like I said, when the rubber hits the road, we got to talk to our doctor about things. If the doctor can't get in behind it, how can I get in behind it? And I think once there's enough information and regulators can provide some to the doctors can do this, they can have that conversation with the consumer, then the awareness and the stigma will be taken off, right? And then once again, finance will follow. The money will always follow where there's an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Erica, is the reduction of stigma just a function of time, or is there other things that we can do?
I think it's just, it comes down to education, right? In order for us to have a conversation about cannabis and how it can come into your life, we need to be able to educate. And it's going to take time. We're 3 years in, and it's not going to be solved overnight. But if we can continue to have conversations with different groups, different levels of consumers, whether they're non-users or the OGs, we want to be able to continue to have that conversation, because that's ultimately the information that we need to drive innovation within the sector, right? We want to understand, how do you use it? What would you be interested in it for, if you're a non-user, so that we can deliver innovative products. But at the end of the day, it comes down to being able to have that conversation.
Okay, Rishi, I have another question off of Slido here. Are cannabis retailers diluting themselves with the quantity of storefronts per capita? What do you think from that perspective?
Yeah, I think no question, depending on, in certain locations, it's a tough situation, right? Because the licenses were given out by lottery. It was done very quickly. There wasn't a lot of knowledge about where other cannabis shops were going to pop up. And, a lot of people had the same thinking: let's pop up in huge retail centers where there's tons of, high density living. I mean, it's a smart idea, but unfortunately, yes, that is what's happening. And I think you look at Alberta, where it was kind of about 18 months ago or so, I think they had the most stores in the country, and you kind of saw profitability per store starting to taper off a little. And it's not an apples to apples comparison, because Alberta, the stores can sell and they can set their own prices, and the LPs can sell directly, versus Ontario, for example. But you see the massive ramp up in Ontario stores. It's just numbers, right? Obviously, sales per store are going to come down, and right now it's very, very difficult, like I was saying, to really, with the restrictive marketing and branding guidelines and the requirement to buy from a wholesaler at the same price, it's very hard to differentiate yourself right now as a retailer. They're trying it, and folks are doing a good job, but it's extremely competitive right now.
Okay, we are running out of time, so I'm going to ask, I think, what will be the final question before I invite you to provide closing remarks. We talked about the international opportunities for the sector in the previous panel. What opportunities exist for the sector domestically? And so we have some sort of idea right now of how big this is as an industry domestically. How much bigger can it be, and how is it going to get there? I'll go with Brad first.
Well, I think I look at our own path, right? Moving from Israel initially, then working with a CBD producer out of Romania, and then doing some stuff out of Malta. And then, like I said, hopefully we're in the final strokes of getting the non-possession selling license to implement our technologies behind that in Canada. I see Republican states as for medical as a huge opportunity in the United States, the red states. I really, really do, because the fact is they're not going to go to adult usage right away because of their political views, and they want better rules and regulations. So we see opportunities. And obviously, I'm not going down to Cancun just for the sun. I'm going down there to actually talk to the Mexican legislators about a better way to, once again, I hate to say it, not get trapped in that, in that gray zone of regulatory quagmire we are in Canada. Maybe there's just a better way to classify products.
Okay, Erica, how big can this market be domestically?
I mean, I think that's a hard question to answer, but I would say, from my perspective as a licensed producer, is we're seeing more and more innovation, right? And as we drive more and more innovation, it opens up new consumers to enter the category. It opens up for opportunities for retail differentiation, all these types of things. So if we, from all levels, can continue to drive innovation and uniqueness, then the industry will continue to multiply at the speed of which it has.
Okay. Mark, I'll turn to you now.
Well, of course, I look at it through the tourism cannabis lens. So we know the demand's there. We saw it before the pandemic hit. So as the industry recovers, this sector will grow too. So what's the top? Where's the saturation point? I wish I knew. Maybe we could figure out a way to make money on that. No, listen, who knows? Listen, but definitely I see a positive trend, and is it going to be exponential? I don't know, honestly.
Okay, Rishi, I left you last because you at Deloitte have actually undertaken a bit of a economic impact study. Can you provide us with some high-level figures or some of the top line things that are coming out of that, and how big do you think this industry can be domestically?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, we know right now the industry, based on last month's sales, is at a run rate of about $4 billion. That's from 3 years ago, right? We know, overall, the overall cannabis industry in Canada is probably close to about, $7 or $8 billion. So we're at about half if you triangulate, in the legal market. So there's a ton more growth that we can steal from the illicit market, not even needing to educate consumers or bring new people to the category. There's, arguably another $4 billion of business going to the illicit market now for both medical and recreational purposes that should be convertible if the legal market can compete on price and quality, continue to make good strides on price and quality. So I think, we ourselves, BDSA and Hi-Fire have forecast, by 2024, the domestic market will be about $7 billion. These are all just forecasts. We forecast $4 to $7 billion 2 years ago before COVID. We didn't think it'd take us this long to get to 4, but we also didn't predict COVID taking 2 years of all of our lives. So it's a resilient industry. It's got it's got a massive consumer base already. With things like focusing on dosage, onset times, also looking at product quality. Companies are focusing on genetics, increasing their genetic banks, coming out with strain refreshes more frequently. Those kind of things are going to drive the market, I think.
Okay, folks. Well, we have nearly run out of time. So many more questions to ask and conversations to have, but unfortunately, we have to move on. So I will go to final statements, and I'll start with you, Mark.
No, happy to go first. Here, final thoughts. We know there's demand for tourism, cannabis tourism, for sure. But if we're really focused on growing this particular market, I think we have to take a very serious look at the barriers. And in addition to that, we need to look at it through the notion of sort of more product development. I think part of the strategy to get there, I think it involves greater partnerships that need to be developed between even just TIAC itself and LPs, for example. or between provincial tourism organizations and, let's say, Destination Canada, which is essentially a research and marketing crown corp. And I think overall, if we're going to grow the sector, there needs to put way more emphasis, I think, on branding, obviously, and promotion and destination marketing. People don't consume products if they're not aware of it. So if we want to attract Canadians to move around and really experience sort of cannabis tourism, they have to be aware of it. Same is true with foreign travelers. And so there you go. There's my 4-point plan as my last remarks.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I'll go to you, Brad.
The one thing I'd add to what Mark said is I'm going to add it, and I'm say it all the time: product consistency, and how do you get that, and using innovation to get there, which I think Erica nailed. I think if, once again, focusing on the end game, and let's talk specifically for medical, better outcomes for medical cannabis patients, and how do you get there and work it backward. And you know what? On the adult use side, a better recreational experience, because if we can kind of focus on that, then we can work it back. Then, like as Rishi said, all those bad guys won't have any customers, right? There'll be no need for them, and because they'll come over to where they know that they get good, regulated, well-costed products.
Okay, final thoughts from you, Rishi?
Yeah, and I'll get back to the economic front. We've got a report coming out in the next couple of months that looks at the impact of the cannabis industry since inception on Canada, and we've looked at direct, indirect, and induced impacts, and it's been over $40 billion of the contribution to GDP. Over 25 billion of that went directly to incomes that supports 151,000 jobs. Those are impressive numbers that I think haven't really been fully fleshed out yet. Things like every dollar spent in the cannabis industry is actually to date returned $1.09 in economic activity. So I think understanding these numbers will help in hopefully re-energizing some of the policy and understanding that they are good long-term infrastructure type policy decisions, not just short-term assistance to a new industry. Again, I'm looking at it from a financial perspective. I think there's a ton of upside left here.
Erica, over to you for final words.
Yeah, I would just say, whether it's, from a licensed producer, a data side with Brad, a tourism side with Mark, whether it's M&A or economic impacts with Rishi, really it's about all of us continuing to have this conversation, learning from each other, working together to overcome these challenges, because all of us working together is a lot more effective than one of us trying to, overcome the challenges by ourselves. So, I obviously thank you to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for allowing us to have this platform to have this conversation. And ultimately, we just need to continue to have those conversations with every level of, policymakers, with industry people, wherever they may sit. We're just excited to learn from each other and overcome it together and grow this industry to where we know it can be.
Okay, excellent. Well, great to join you all, fellow panelists, for this final panel of the day. Well, there you go, Health Canada, Government of Canada. You have been provided with a lot of testimony from the industry, from various perspectives of the industry, and as you undertake your regulatory review, I think that a lot of slack was given for the first go around, because how do you regulate a new industry? But now we know exactly what we need to do going forward. So you've been provided with millions and millions of dollars of free advice today from the Canadian Chamber and everybody within the cannabis industry. So thank you all for having me, and again, a big thank you to our audience for joining us as well. It's now my pleasure to turn it back over to founding partner and CEO of Diplomat Consulting and co-chair of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce's National Cannabis Working Group, Nathan Misson. Over to you, Nathan.
Thanks a lot, Keenan. Well, we've reached the end of today's program, but we have to quickly stop and say thank you to some of the people that helped us get here today. So I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of people that don't get enough credit. First, I want to acknowledge Kimberly Gale at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce who really started the conversation at the Canadian Chamber about bringing cannabis to the Chamber. Ryan Greer, my first co-chair at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce National Cannabis Working Group, who was instrumental in help standing it up. Jackie King, of course, who was an incredible advocate and took the cannabis sector in Canada to the first meeting where the OECD actually got to hear from what the cannabis sector could be, as well as the International Chamber of Commerce. Christy Murray and Jared Cohen, who have done a phenomenal job behind the scenes today, and all of the people at the Canadian Chamber who do so much to put on events like this. But I also want to really recognize the challenge and the struggle that it has been to get here to today. So we need to take a moment to think about the many advocates, entrepreneurs, regulators that are trying their best to stand up this sector from the ground up. It hasn't been easy, but one of the things that we've done is overcome. And I think one of the great insights that that's going to leave us for is how many incredible young dynamic professionals have cut their teeth above and beyond where they could have been in their professional career because of the cannabis sector. This sector will have a profound influence in training the next wave of corporate leaders in our country who think big, scale big, and want to achieve great things while doing it well and giving back to the community. That opportunity for enrichment as a Canadian is something we should all be proud for and proud of as a sector. I want to just leave a couple of quick other things. 67 nations in the world are now talking about cannabis legalization. Canada was second. We're the first G7 and the first G20. We have to think about that as an opportunity, not a loss. We have to look at this as a sector that we own, that we can continue to support and grow and take to the world. And a sector that succeeds during one of the worst global pandemics that we've ever had with COVID and continue to grow and expand. And that's a pretty incredible thing that we don't take enough time to pat ourselves on the back about all the people who had helped that achieve that success. I also think that while we're thinking about a 3-year cannabis review, we should also think about the 10 provinces and the 3 territories that build regulatory regimes, and we shouldn't let them off the hook too. There's a great opportunity for doing a best practice example in Canada, creating a best built better model using language from the States that we could take, figure out, harmonize, and then take to those 67 nations in the world, creating great opportunities for Canadian businesses to not just succeed here at home, but succeed in the world. I want to leave you with one thing that I always try and remind myself. I have 3 young children, and this is an incredible opportunity for me to be part of a sector that has grown from the ground up. This could be our internet as Canadians, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done to get us there today. And I'm really proud of the Canadian sector and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to be our partners to help that go forward. And now, to close things out, it is my pleasure to turn things over to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce President and CEO, Perrin Beatty. Have a great rest of the week. And Perrin Beatty, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Nathan. As always, you've shown your dedication and commitment to the sector, and you've done so much in terms of the development of the sector. Most grateful for that. I want to thank you, express a word of thank you again to all of the panelists and all of our audience members who were able to join us today for our first Cannabis Executive Summit. These are crucial conversations to be having, and it was a real treat to hear all of the insights shared by our panelists today. The growth that's been demonstrated by the cannabis sector is truly outstanding. With Canada only having legalized cannabis for recreational use 3 years ago, it's still a relatively new industry, and it has a great deal of potential to grow even more in the future. We're only the 2nd country in the world to legalize cannabis for recreational use, which gives us tremendous opportunities to export best practices, both at home and abroad. In 3 years, we've learned a great deal, which is why the upcoming review of the Cannabis Act is so important. Our National Cannabis Working Group, as you saw today, has been hard at work, and we look forward to working with the federal government on the review. But the work shouldn't stop there. Canada must be laser focused on economic growth, not just to successfully recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also for long-term prosperity. And cannabis has an important role to play in achieving this goal. And the sector will require support from all levels of government for it to remain both economically viable while also protecting the health and safety of Canadians. I want to thank all of our featured speakers today, Our Lady Peace frontman and co-founder of Loop Pool, Rain Maida, and Loop Pool CEO and co-founder Ian Kwachansky, as well as MP Erskine Smith and Kristen McLeod from Public Safety Canada for taking the time to share their insights with us. And thank you, of course, as well to our panelists and our moderators for their contributions to these conversations today. And I'd also once again like to thank our sponsors and our membership for making today happen. We definitely couldn't have done it without you. And then finally, a very big thank you to each and every one of you, our audience, for taking the time to join us today and for being part of the conversation. I know that we'll see each other again soon. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your week.